My unfaithful wife thought her affair would strengthen our marriage, but I had a different plan. Sherry believed I was unaware of her actions, thinking I was either foolish or oblivious to her growing affair with her co-worker, Todd. She assumed I'd tolerate her behavior and accept her continuing involvement with him. However, she was wrong. What she didn't know was that I had been suspicious for quite a while. I had noticed changes, clear signs of infidelity, such as her working late frequently, updating her wardrobe, becoming more physically close with him, and losing interest in the things we once enjoyed together. Despite my attempts to talk to her about my concerns, she ignored them. Naturally, Sherry denied everything, blaming my worries on insecurities and possessiveness. Since she was working overtime, I had no choice but to hire a private investigator. I refused to stay in the dark about the truth. From the start of our relationship and throughout our 10-year marriage, I made it clear that I would never tolerate infidelity. So, with mixed emotions, I sat in the office of private investigator Jake Sloan and listened to his report. I felt some relief when he told me that Sherry hadn't cheated yet, but that relief was short-lived when he added the term "for now." He explained that while my wife hadn't yet crossed the line into a full affair, it was only a matter of time. Apparently, Sherry and Todd referred to each other as working spouses, a term I despised. To me, it meant they shared an intimate bond, which I could not accept. It turned out that my suspicion was right. According to the investigator's report, Sherry and Todd had lunch together every day, just the two of them. They held hands, sat close, and often hugged, sometimes even kissing. I was furious when I saw the photos and wanted to confront Todd. In addition to the lunches, they often stayed late at work together, even though there was no reason for it. It seemed as if they were trying to avoid going home to their spouses, taking as much time from the day as they could. The investigator told me he had traced Sherry's emails and messages. I knew this was illegal and couldn't be used in a divorce case in our state. While infidelity was grounds for divorce, it was a difficult process and no-fault divorces were much easier, so I didn't need the evidence for legal reasons. I just wanted it for my own knowledge. Sloan refused to provide me with copies of the actual messages. Instead, he gave me a summary of what they contained. He assured me that Sherry never spoke badly about me, though Todd tried to badmouth me several times. Still, Sherry refused to let him. In a way, that was some comfort. The emails and texts confirmed their romantic relationship, though neither of them had declared love for each other. Their conversations were very intimate, bordering on sexting. Todd had sent Sherry pictures of his body, and she seemed to enjoy reciprocating with shots of her bare chest. As far as Sloan could tell, she hadn't sent any explicit pictures yet. As I sat in the investigator's office, trying to decide what to do next, Sloan gave me the worst news of all. Todd's wife was going out of town for 3 days to visit her mother. The lovers decided to take advantage of the opportunity to meet up and take their relationship to the next level. The only thing standing in their way was me. They weren't sure how they could spend the night together if I stayed nearby, since I had no plans of leaving town, making it nearly impossible. They thought of different strategies. One idea was for Sherry to tell me she was going on a girls-only weekend trip, but they feared I might find out the truth by talking to her friends. She didn't want anyone involved, so they abandoned that plan. Another option they considered was convincing me to leave town, but I quickly remembered Sherry had once suggested I organize a golf trip with my buddies, an option I rejected. In the end, they decided to take a direct approach: honesty. Todd thought I was on the verge of becoming a betrayed man, someone who would do anything to keep Sherry as my loving, happy wife, even if it meant allowing her affair. Somehow, he persuaded Sherry that by sleeping with him, she would improve our love life and relationship. He convinced her that if she told me about her plans with Todd, I would reluctantly agree to let her go ahead. Clearly, Todd underestimated my resolve, but what shocked me the most was that Sherry bought into his lies. It should have been obvious to her that I wouldn't tolerate this. If she didn't realize that, then she might not be thinking clearly. Sloan gave me all the information he had, and I took it, then went home. I asked him to continue keeping track of Sherry's messages and let me know if anything changed. On Friday, Sloan called to tell me that Sherry planned to meet me on Monday after work. She intended to tell me that she was going on a date with Todd the following Friday night. They would start with dinner and dancing, then spend the night in a hotel room. She would come back to our house on Saturday or possibly Sunday, depending on their plans. Sherry and Todd practiced their story, convincing themselves that I would go along with it. They expected me to be upset and angry at first, but Sherry planned to reassure me that it was just a one-time thing, even though both of them knew it wasn't. She even suggested that afterward, we could have intimacy together as a reward for my understanding, assuming I would be happy to accept Todd's leftovers and agree to her demands. How thoughtful of them to consider my feelings. With only 2 days to prepare for this confrontation, Sherry and Todd joked that it would be an intervention. However, I was determined to turn their intervention into my moment of control. Over the weekend, I thought through different possibilities, considering whether I wanted to try to save my marriage. My plan naturally developed as I reflected on my feelings for Sherry. I decided to confront the situation head-on and end it once and for all. When Sherry and I first got married, I was blissfully happy. We spent all our time together, sharing everything we had experienced in life. She was my best friend and my best lover, but somehow, all of that seemed to disappear. Perhaps that's just how things go. Nothing lasts forever. Maybe my view of marriage was outdated and idealized, imagining us as a team facing life's challenges together. Having experienced failed marriages before, Sherry and I both wondered whether the problem was with us or with the institution of marriage itself. How can people expect to maintain feelings, desires, interests, and passions when fate keeps changing everything and everyone? In a world dominated by fast-paced culture, social media, and instant gratification, maybe marriage, like dinosaurs and CDs, was becoming obsolete. I briefly considered the idea of letting Sherry be with Todd, but quickly rejected it. I refused to let him take my place. I was ready for a fight. When my wife called me just after lunch on Monday, I answered, noticing her recent lack of calls during my work hours. I expressed concern about it and asked if everything was okay. She greeted me with a cheerful, "Hi, honey," which made me wonder if she used the same endearment with Todd. Despite the thought, I brushed it off and asked if she'd be home on time tonight, since she had something important to discuss. She agreed and confirmed that she had something important to share as well. I also mentioned having some big news, confirming that I would be available around 5:15. However, she didn't respond right away, and I sensed she was trying to figure out my news. When she asked about it, I decided to keep it for our later, face-to-face conversation. I excused myself, saying I needed to focus on my monthly report, and hung up. I then informed my boss that I would be taking the rest of the day off. He didn't mind sitting at the kitchen table later. I anxiously waited for her arrival. The garage door opened at 5:27, and despite my high emotions, I kept a calm exterior. I had a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc on ice with 2 glasses ready. She entered alone, tossing her keys and purse on the table. I felt a sense of relief that she hadn't brought Todd along, which would have made things more complicated. I greeted her warmly with a smile. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, using the same affectionate term she had used earlier. I welcomed her home and asked if she needed some time before we began our conversation, or if she wanted to dive right in. My immediate desire to talk seemed to surprise her, and I could tell she wasn't expecting it so soon. My goal was to keep her in suspense and maintain control of the situation. Acknowledging her surprise at my readiness to talk, Sherry admitted she hadn't expected me to wait. However, she agreed that starting the conversation sooner would be better and joined me at the table. I suggested that I share my news first and asked if she had any objections. Hesitantly, she responded that it was okay, though she seemed slightly uncertain. Without waiting for her full approval, I poured us both a glass of wine. She accepted it gratefully and drank half before I refilled her glass. Starting to discuss my thoughts, I explained that I had been thinking a lot about it. I made it clear that I wasn't going to beat around the bush and saw no reason to drag things out. Pausing briefly to build tension, I watched as Sherry leaned forward, her gaze fixed on me. She asked, "What's the matter?" I stated bluntly that I wanted a divorce, allowing a few moments for her to absorb the message. At first, confusion clouded her face, as if my words weren't registering. Then, realization slowly set in, and her expression shifted to one of shock, fear, and anxiety. It was quickly replaced by surprise, perhaps because she was worried her affair with Todd might be exposed. When she asked why, I told her that my feelings had changed. I bluntly said, "I don't love you anymore." My words seemed to have a deep effect on Sherry. Struggling to process what I had said, she asked, "You don't love me anymore?" I responded, stating a fabricated detail that I couldn't recall the exact moment when it happened. In truth, I had been feeling this way for a while, but I wanted to make it sound like it happened suddenly. I was well aware that it had been a long time, but I had been avoiding facing the truth. Perplexed, Sherry asked, "What are you talking about?" Her expression showed signs of an emotional breakdown, which caught me off guard. To help her understand my perspective, I asked her to recall the early days of our marriage. I reminded her of the things we used to do together, the routines we shared. I talked about the close bond we once had. Sherry nodded in agreement as I mentioned our joint lunches, the excitement of coming home to each other, and the hobbies we enjoyed, like the pottery classes she had convinced me to take. Her intense gaze showed that she was reflecting on the memories. "It wasn't about the pottery," she said. "It was about sharing the experience with you. I loved every minute of it, watching you and helping you." She admired my enthusiasm. Similarly, painting the Christmas Village buildings became one of our shared activities. We bought a dozen painted houses and created a display for Christmas. It was a tedious task, but we found joy in it. Sherry admitted that my houses were always better than hers, recalling the nights we spent at the table painting the shingles. We also dedicated hours to painting large posters she had bought during a trip to Myrtle Beach, long before adult coloring books became popular. Although we still had hundreds of coloring pens, they, like our love, had all dried up. When Sherry defensively said that her love hadn't dried up, I chose to ignore her and continued. Our friends often expressed envy over our relationship. We did everything together, taking long walks daily, holding hands. If I needed to run errands, like going to the hardware store for grass trimmer line, she would come with me. Likewise, if she wanted to shop for clothes, I would wait patiently outside the dressing room. Sherry challenged me, pointing out that I didn't always enjoy accompanying her on shopping trips. I explained that I was often on my phone, not particularly interested in the clothes, but I was there to be with her. I told her I didn't mind what she picked out because I found her beautiful in everything. I mentioned that I could have stayed home, watching sports, but I chose to be with her instead. We talked about how other women in the neighborhood would gather for activities like bingo or bachelorette parties, but Sherry never showed any interest. I remembered her reason for not participating. She preferred spending time with me rather than with the chickens. Reflecting on our shared moments, we remembered cuddling under the covers on many nights, watching our favorite movie. Sherry wiped away a tear and expressed her love for the film. I mentioned that we must have watched it at least 100 times, and that I hoped we could continue watching it together. In response to my mention of divorce, Sherry exclaimed that she didn't want to end our marriage. She envisioned growing old together, taking cooking and ballroom dancing lessons, or simply lying in bed reading books. Expressing the growing distance between us, I admitted uncertainty about when it all started. Looking intently into her eyes, I explained that we had transitioned from dining out 2 or 3 days a week to doing it just once a week, a change largely influenced by Sherry. She claimed she didn't have time for lunch outside the office, which turned out to be untrue. She continued to eat out, but with someone else. Eventually, we stopped having lunch together altogether, and I started having lunch with my co-workers instead. I gradually began enjoying their company, perhaps even too much. I exaggerated the situation during our conversation, trying not to place all the blame on Sherry. I didn't want to make her defensive or turn the discussion into a scolding session. It wasn't my goal, at least not yet. Our habit of coming home early to spend time together lost its meaning. We started working later and later, and when we finally returned home, we often felt distant or distracted. In response to Sherry's question about why I never talked about it, I admitted she was right. Despite having expressed my concerns many times before, I agreed with her and expressed a wish to understand why spending time together hadn't been important to her. I confessed feeling like I had failed in that regard. I felt as though I was taking responsibility for our separation, but I knew that wasn't the truth. I realized that if I confronted Sherry about Todd right away, we couldn't end the discussion without it turning nasty. She would never see my side of things. She would only see me as a controlling, jealous idiot. Before revealing what I knew, I wanted her to remember what we had and think about her role in destroying it. Gradually, we stopped doing almost everything together. She started going to her bachelorette parties, and I started going to poker nights. She'd go to spas on the weekends, and I would go golfing. Sherry and I spent entire days without talking about anything beyond the weather or the latest news. Our intimacy also suffered, with fatigue or lack of interest often getting in the way of closeness. Reflecting on our early days of marriage, I reminded her how we couldn't get enough of each other. We used to be intimate 4 or 5 times a week, sometimes multiple times a day. I playfully mentioned fondling her while she cooked, or skipping dinner just to spend the night together. Activities like going to the hot tub, which used to be a regular part of our routine, had become non-existent for over a year. When Sherry suggested that I didn't want intimacy anymore, I knew things had changed and I refuted her idea, finding it baseless. I believed she might be trying to shift the blame onto me to justify her own actions. In response, I laughed and clarified, "Oh God, no. I never stopped wanting intimacy. I'm just as eager now as I was 10 years ago. I simply stopped wanting intimacy with you." I knew that would hurt deeply. She had thought she rejected me physically, but here I was telling her that the lack of intimacy was because I didn't want her. I almost would have laughed if I wasn't so hurt. Sherry, taken aback, asked what I meant when I said I didn't want intimacy with her. I casually mentioned losing interest and described how, from my perspective, she seemed unresponsive and disinterested in anything exciting or remotely daring. I suggested that it appeared as though she wanted to finish quickly and move on to more interesting activities like knitting. I expressed my desire for weekend intimacy marathons and emphasized that she didn't even want me to give her incredible pleasure. I called our physical encounters boring and claimed that I had faked enjoyment in the last few instances just to get it over with. When Sherry objected, claiming that I had come inside her, I reminded her that she insisted on using contraceptives despite being on birth control. I explained that she never paid attention to the contraceptives, making it easy for me to fake it by humming, rolling off, and disposing of the empty contraceptive. Her reaction was one of shock and embarrassment, and I admitted that my plan had worked. Apologizing, I added insult to injury by suggesting, "It's me, not you." She stared at me for a moment, her face flushed, tears dried. I wasn't sure if her expression reflected anger, frustration, or embarrassment. In an attempt to ease the tension, I refilled her empty glass, and she took a big sip. Continuing, I explained that it was only a matter of time before we started seeking companionship elsewhere. I clarified that when I said someone else, I didn't mean myself, though she wasn't aware of that distinction. Suddenly, Sherry asked angrily if I was cheating on her or in love with someone else. In response, I reassured her of my commitment to our marriage and emphasized my aversion to infidelity. I acknowledged our shared history of being betrayed by our previous spouses, expressing my dedication to not repeating those mistakes. Sherry apologized, recognizing the unfair accusation and agreeing that she knew I wouldn't engage in such behavior. However, she looked guilty and couldn't meet my gaze, her hands trembling. Transitioning to the topic of our intimate relationship, I suggested waiting until after the divorce to be together for the first time, hinting at a new love interest. I then revealed my big news. I had met with my lawyer and finalized the paperwork. I informed her that she would be served with divorce papers on Friday. In response to her desperate inquiry, I reiterated that she would indeed be served on Friday, attempting to conceal a smile. I explained that it was for the best, allowing both of us to regain our freedom and acknowledge that the last 10 years had been a waste of time. I added that the past years weren't a waste for me, and suggested to Sherry that she likely desired the divorce as much as I did. I mentioned that it seemed she hadn't wanted to be with me for a long time, labeling our wedding a mistake. Sherry objected, expressing her unwillingness to get a divorce. She insisted that she loved me and wanted to be married forever. Regrettably, I responded that I no longer loved her, citing the no-fault divorce state we were in. I explained that splitting assets equally was the norm, and we could avoid a messy legal process unless one of us cheated and infidelity could be proven, which was unlikely in our case. I proposed dividing our money equally, planning to visit the bank the next day. I mentioned the need to open new accounts, get new credit cards, change utility bills, and sell the house with a realtor scheduled to put it on the market on Wednesday. Sherry, feeling overwhelmed, objected, expressing uncertainty and asking me to stop. She cried again as I reassured her that I had already packed my things and would be staying in a hotel until I moved permanently. I suggested that she stay in the house until it was sold. Sherry shouted for me to wait, but I insisted there was no need, emphasizing the urgency to handle everything before Friday. Confused, she demanded to know why Friday was so important. I casually mentioned that it was the day she had planned a date with Todd, her boyfriend. I suggested it was the day they intended to spend the night in a hotel together for a passionate evening. Sherry froze, her eyes wide and mouth agape as she tried to respond. I pulled out a folder containing a summary report from a private investigator. I showed her the section detailing her plans with Todd on Friday night, interrupting her before she could speak. I pointed out that the report confirmed their reservations at the Gaylord, Texas for that night. When she began to explain, I cut her off, mockingly suggesting she might claim it wasn't what it looked like. I reminded her of the pictures that captured her and Todd kissing at lunch. Staring at me, tears streaming down her face, Sherry apologized quietly. With a wide smile on my face, I declared, "Now I remember exactly when I stopped loving you." I revealed that it was the day I discovered her plans to involve me in a betrayed man scenario, mirroring the betrayal from my ex-wife. She blurted out an apology, desperately trying to convince me that she didn't love Todd. According to her, the rendezvous with him was just a fling to rekindle our relationship. She assured me that after spending the night with Todd, we would spend the rest of the weekend making passionate love. She claimed Todd said it would turn me on and revitalize our sensuality. I countered, expressing my skepticism about revitalizing our love life by being with someone else instead of with me. I questioned the logic behind her actions. She attempted to change tactics, mentioning that Todd said I would be okay with it if it made her happy. I reiterated that I wanted her to be happy with me as we used to be, not with another man. I couldn't fathom how she thought I would be okay with such a proposition, given my clear stance against infidelity. She tried to justify her actions by claiming it wouldn't be infidelity since she would have my permission. Firmly, I stated that it would never happen. Realizing I should have understood that from the beginning, I expressed my disbelief at how I had allowed boredom and loneliness to lead me down this path. I admitted that Todd had sparked my interest again. In response to her questioning how I could feel bored and lonely when we were happily in love, I acknowledged that I didn't know. She continued, suggesting that I might have felt that way because I cut us off, stopped having lunch with her, and avoided spending time together. She accused me of choosing to put myself in that position and spending time with Todd instead of her, creating a situation where both Todd and I were bored and lonely. She denied the accusation, insisting that she couldn't believe she would have intentionally distanced herself. She recounted how I had told her, I had been too busy for lunch, and on one occasion, I even texted her to go without me. She believed it was my decision for us to stop having lunch, and since I never mentioned it, she thought it meant I didn't realize the change. Sherry expressed that I had been so absorbed in my world with Todd that I didn't notice I was losing her. She declared that she didn't want Todd. She wanted me and us to be the way we used to be. Apologizing, she admitted to screwing up and giving up on us. I insisted it was too late, shaking my head in disagreement. Sherry pleaded, promising to quit her job, work elsewhere, and never see Todd again. She professed her love for me and claimed she hadn't cheated because they hadn't had sex. She acknowledged her foolishness, stating that Todd meant nothing to her, and begged me not to leave. I maintained that it wasn't that simple. When she said I stopped her before she went too far, I argued that just the physical aspect would have sealed the deal. Sherry protested, saying they were just friends. I countered, emphasizing that she should have been friends with me more than anyone else. Overwhelmed, Sherry dropped her head into her arms, sobbing. She vowed never to neglect me or take me for granted again. She pleaded, asking if we could treat the situation as a big mistake and begging for forgiveness. I responded, stating that it wasn't just a mistake, but a betrayal of our love. She insisted that her heart had always been mine, and that I was the one who was willing to give my body to another woman. I reminded her that she had stopped me and questioned if my love for her was so insignificant that I couldn't fight for it. I expressed that she meant everything to me and I would fight for her. Sherry claimed she would die for me. I harshly declared my lack of affection, causing her to scream and attempt to pull me toward her. Despite her apologies and pleas, I asserted that, while I believed she was sorry, it didn't change the fact that I no longer loved her. I assured her that she had Todd for comfort, and when she revealed that Todd was married and only interested in a physical relationship, I grinned. I suggested that his wife might have something to say about that. I informed her that both Todd's wife, I had used the same divorce attorney, handing her a folder containing the investigator's report, pictures of her with Todd, and details of the divorce proposal. I advised her to read the entire document. Sherry pleaded with me not to take such actions, suggesting that if I wanted to accompany her to the bank, I should call and let her know. I got up from the table and walked out of the house, ignoring the sound of my wife crying. Sherry grappled with the idea of divorce, and to avoid a prolonged and expensive legal battle, I agreed when the judge recommended marriage counseling. The counseling exceeded my expectations, fostering open and judgment-free communication between Sherry and me. She gained insight into why Todd's advances nearly jeopardized our marriage, and I conveyed the pain and humiliation she had caused. The counselor took pride in our progress. After a few sessions, I returned home, and we shared several passionate moments. Sherry willingly embraced my desires, and erotically, we rekindled our connection. A year later, we had rebuilt the loving relationship we once shared at the start of our marriage. Sherry switched jobs and joined my company. We commuted together, had lunch daily, not out of obligation, but because we genuinely wanted to. In fact, we did nearly everything together. We adorned a small Christmas tree, completed abandoned paintings, took up another ceramics class, and even enrolled in ballroom dancing. To my surprise, a box of colored pens I found wasn't dry. One night, while cuddling under a blanket and watching You've Got Mail, Sherry kissed me and expressed the need to discuss something important. Tears welled in her eyes, causing a moment of panic as my heart skipped a beat. Without giving me a chance to respond, Sherry revealed, "You're going to be a daddy." I smiled, wiped away her tears, and in a playful manner mimicked Tom Hanks saying, "Don't cry, shop girl." So, I'm just obsessed with happy endings.